Before we start, a quick note about what this channel is and what it isn't. This isn't a recap channel, and it's not a highlight reel. We're here for the parts of Panem that happen after the cameras turn away, the systems behind the games, the contracts hidden inside victory, the lives that keep unfolding long after the anthem ends. Each video on this channel is built to slow things down, to follow the logic the Capitol relies on, the details it hopes you won't connect, and the people who live with the consequences year after year. If that's the kind of Hunger Games analysis you're looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribing just means you'll keep a seat here when we move on to the next story. Now, let's start where Panem always wants you to stop paying attention. Everyone remembers the bow, that clean arc of wood in Katniss's hands, the mockingjay pin flashing against her jacket. Those are the objects we attach to her strength. Precision, defiance, survival. But put all of that on pause for a second, because here's the real question. What's the one thing we never see Katniss hold? Not a weapon, a language for her own emotions. At face value, Katniss Everdeen is the perfect victor fantasy. She hunts, she calculates odds, she reads a forest or a threat in a heartbeat. You can track her through the arena, through the districts, through the Capitol, and it feels obvious why she survives. But almost no one talks about the weakness that nearly destroys everything she fights for. Not a physical injury, not the games themselves, a blind spot in her own mind. What if the deadliest arena Katniss ever faces isn't the Hunger Games or the Quarter Quell at all, but the inside of her own head? What if her real opponent is her inability to understand and communicate what she feels? That part matters because it quietly rewrites what you think this story is about. It stops being just a rebellion narrative and becomes a story about a girl who can't translate her inner world, even when the future of Panem depends on it. There is a lot to uncover here. Katniss can read the woods around District 12 better than anyone. She can tell you which berries are poison, which twig snap means predator, which camera angle the Capitol is probably using. But then you put her next to Peter in the cave, and suddenly she has no idea if his kindness is strategy or love. She tells herself it's an act for the audience, even when the text keeps hinting it isn't. So why does she cling to the wrong answer? This is where we talk about contradiction. She spots a political trap in Snow's white rose instantly, but she can't see the trap she's setting in her own relationship with Gale when she keeps him close for safety while refusing to name what he means to her. She will volunteer for Prim without hesitation, but she can't say, "I'm afraid," to Prim after the bombing of District 12. She just shuts down, goes silent, disappears into the role of the Mockingjay instead of the role of a sister. Any victor will tell you the games don't end when you win. For Katniss, they don't even end when the Capitol falls. Her emotional illiteracy keeps playing out in the background, shaping who she trusts, how she performs as a symbol, and ultimately, who lives and who dies. The books almost dare you to notice this. The narration is so blunt, so practical, that you can miss how often she misreads the people she loves most. Peter, Gale, Prim, even herself. So why build a hero who can decode a rebellion, but can't decode her own heart? In the next section, we're going to cover how that hidden weakness doesn't just affect Katniss's relationships, it quietly steers the entire revolution. Why Katniss's weakness matters more than her aim. So when we say this weakness steers the entire revolution, that's not poetic exaggeration. It's logistics. It's strategy. It's who gets to live. and who doesn't. Back in District 12, Katniss's world is brutally simple. Food, shelter, don't get whipped, don't let Prim be reaped. Her emotional range is there, but it's buried under a constant math problem. How many squirrels equal enough tesserae to get through winter? You're not processing feelings when you're counting bread crusts. The games of her childhood are already survival games. Then suddenly she's the Mockingjay. Now the capital and the districts don't just need her to shoot, they need her to understand symbols, to cry on cue, to project hope, to read a crowd's mood and adjust. This is where we talk about a girl who has never been taught to name her own emotions, being asked to manage an entire nation's. What could go wrong? Here's the real question. Why does she keep misreading the two people who know her best? Why does she insist Peter's confession is strategy long after it stops benefiting him? Why can't she see Gale's slow radicalization until his whatever it takes becomes a mass casualty plan? Why does she keep repeating, almost defensively, that she's not good at feelings when the rebellion's whole media campaign is built on her emotional impact? At face value, surviving the arena should be the end of the nightmare. You win, you go home. Roll credits. But Collins flips that promise. Victory just promotes Katniss into a new arena where the rules are inverted. In the first games, shutting down keeps her alive. In the Quarter Quell and the Propaganda War, shutting down makes her manipulable. The old tools, avoidance, going it alone, assuming everyone else is more strategic than sincere, start actively sabotaging her. That part matters because Panem runs on performance. Snow and Coin both understand that in a world built on propaganda, the person who doesn't understand their own emotions is the easiest to weaponize. Katniss becomes a symbol precisely because she can't quite see herself as one. She keeps asking, "Why me?" while everyone else is asking, "How can we use her?" There is a lot to uncover here about how a victor can win the games and still lose her sense of self. And the cost doesn't stop at her internal life. Her emotional illiteracy bends the entire plot. It distorts the Peter-Gale-Katniss relationship into a series of misreads and near misses. It shapes which strategies the rebellion chooses, who they trust, who they sacrifice, and even how Panem is rebuilt when the war ends. In the next section, we're going to cover how that quiet flaw echoes through the love triangle, the bombing of the Capitol, and the broken, uncertain peace that follows. Naming the flaw, emotional illiteracy in a survivor's mind. So if that flaw echoes through everything, we need to name it properly. Katniss Everdeen's real weakness isn't cowardice, selfishness, or indecision. It's emotional illiteracy, not in the pop psychology sense, but in the literal survival brain way. She doesn't have the tools to recognize, name, or trust her own emotions. She can track a squirrel at 50 yards, calculate tesserae risk for a whole district, and read the games as arena the way other people read a map. But ask her what she feels. The system crashes. Here's the real question. Why is someone so observant about danger, so blind about desire, grief, and attachment? The reason goes back to how her mind was trained. From the moment her father dies and her mother shuts down, Katniss learns that feelings don't keep you alive. Snares, bows, and a deadpan face at the hob do. So she quietly rewrites her internal rulebook. Emotions are background noise. Food and safety are the only data that matter. Canon keeps telling you this, over and over. In the first games, Peter throws her the bread. Years later, she still frames it as a debt, a strategy, a move in some relationship economy she can't quite pass. When he confesses his love on Caesar Flickerman's stage, she immediately assumes it's an angle for sponsors, not a genuine confession. At face value, that sounds pragmatic, but that part matters because it shows her default setting. Kindness is always a tactic, never a feeling. She says outright that she doesn't understand people's motives. She watches Gale's anger at the Capitol and thinks in terms of hunting partners and escape plans, not in terms of a boy whose entire identity is being warped by injustice. She dismisses her own jealousy when he kisses her, filing it under confusion or guilt instead of attraction. Language breaks down right where the feelings start. This is where we talk about the narration as evidence. We're going to cover her voice not just as plot commentary, but as a psychological document. Notice how detailed she is about terrain, food, and weapons, and how vague she becomes about love, loyalty, or even her own trauma. She'll tell you exactly how many snares she sets, but when Rue dies, all she can do is describe motions, flowers, song, salute. The emotion is there, but it slips through words. And here's the contradiction. To the districts and the capital audience, Katniss is the symbol of love, sacrifice, rebellion, hope. She's the girl on fire, the devoted sister, the victor who defies snow. Internally, she feels more like a glitching survival program trying to improvise appropriate emotions based on what keeps Prim safe and the cameras satisfied. There is a lot to uncover here, from seam poverty to Victor's village, through the bombing of the Capitol and the uneasy peace after. This emotional blind spot threads through every major choice she makes. In the next section, we'll trace how that hidden weakness rewrites the love triangle, war strategy, and the future of Panem itself. Our game plan, how we're taking Katniss apart, gently. So here's how we're going to pull this apart without just turning Katniss into another Capitol spectacle. First, we go back to where this emotional illiteracy is born. Not in the arena, but in that cramped seam kitchen with a checked-out mother and a kid who learns that feelings don't put food on the table. We're going to cover her father's death, her mother's withdrawal, the hunting trips with Gale, and why District 12 quietly rewards the girl who doesn't break down. That part matters because it turns not talking about it into a survival skill long before the games ever start. Then we'll move forward book by book and ask what happens when that survival skill tries to run a relationship or a rebellion. In the first games, we'll track every moment Katniss misreads Peter's confession as strategy, every time she treats affection as another sponsor ploy. Why does she trust Haymitch's drunken signals more than her own instincts? Why does she only let herself feel things when it keeps them both alive? Here's the real question. How many plot turns are actually just her dodging her own emotions? From there, we go straight into Catching Fire and the Gale-Katniss-Peter triangle, not as romance drama, but as a pressure test of her weak spot. This is where we talk about Gale kissing her after the whipping, Peter offering stability on the train, and Katniss trying to calculate which boy keeps her family safer instead of asking what she wants. We'll look at how Snow weaponizes that confusion, why the districts project their own hope onto her, and how every unresolved feeling becomes political ammunition. Then we hit Mockingjay, where she stops being a girl and becomes a logo. We'll dissect the propo, the hospital bombing, and that eerie numbness in District 13. At face value, she's the Mockingjay, but internally, she's outsourcing her entire identity to a symbol, because that's easier than saying, "I'm not okay." Why does she volunteer for missions that might kill her, but freeze when Peter asks a simple question about their relationship? We're also going meta. We'll compare book Katniss, whose blunt, emotionally avoidant narration lets you hear every dodge in real time, with movie Katniss, where those thoughts vanish behind silence and reaction shots. What gets lost when you can't live inside her head? How does that change our sense of her weakness and our sympathy for it? Finally, we'll zoom out into speculative world building. What if Panem had any form of emotional education or even basic trauma care in the districts? Would Katniss still become the Mockingjay or a very different kind of victor? We'll close by asking whether she ever truly overcomes this flaw, or if the ending is about building a small, fragile piece around a wound that never fully heals. Welcome to the arena of feelings, not fireballs. So when we talk about Katniss's hidden weakness, we're not just doing character roast for fun. We're stepping into a different kind of arena. If you're new here, this channel basically lives in the victor's village of analysis. We're post-games, we walk through the empty streets, peek into the houses, and ask why each crack in the wall is there. We're going to cover everything from Katniss's psychology to Snow's propaganda strategy to what the districts tell us about Panem's entire social order. At face value, that sounds very big picture. Politics, systems, rebellions. But here's the real question. How do those giant forces actually move through one traumatized girl from District 12 who can't name what she feels but can recite hunting routes from memory? That's where this channel lives, in the relationship between the huge machinery of the games and the tiny, quiet choices characters make in response. So if you're the kind of person who pauses on a single line where Katniss misreads Peter's expression, or you wonder why Snow chooses roses instead of any other symbol, you're in the right place. This is where we talk about why a capital built on spectacle is terrified of something as small as a teenager learning to say, "I'm afraid," out loud. There is a lot to uncover here when we treat these stories as if they're real history and real case studies, not just fuel for shipping wars. That part matters because once you start reading Katniss as a psychological puzzle, scenes you thought you knew start feeling different. Her volunteering for Prim, her decision to trust Peter in the cave, the way she freezes when Gale asks her to run. None of those are just plot points. They're stress tests on the same emotional blind spot. And if you enjoy pulling on those threads, asking why she reacts that way, what other choice she even thinks she has, go ahead and stay in this district of the internet with us. I won't tell you to support the channel in capital speak. I will say, if you want more deep dives into Snow's long game, Johanna's rage, or Haymitch's survival strategies, consider sticking around. We're building a whole series on hidden flaws, what each victor can't see about themselves, and how the games weaponize that. And just like Katniss needs Peter, Haymitch, even Prim to hold up a mirror to her, this channel actually runs on your perspectives, your agreements, your "no, that's wrong, here's my read," your questions about scenes we barely see on the page. That's the fuel. Later in this video, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on one specific scene where her emotional blind spot does the most damage. You'll know it when we get there. For now, keep that in the back of your mind as we go deeper into how this weakness is built in from the very first chapter. Where the crack starts. Father, mother, and the seam. So if her weakness is baked in from the first chapter, we have to rewind to the moment the recipe changes. Before the arena, before the reaping. Back to District 12, when Katniss is just a kid in the seam and the world still makes a certain brutal kind of sense. At face value, her childhood already looks hard. Coal dust, hunger, the constant question of whether there will be enough to eat. But before the mine explosion, there's a structure. Her father sings. He teaches her to hunt. He turns the woods into a place of promise instead of pure danger. You can feel that early relationship anchoring her. There is a lot to uncover here because this is the one person she trusts without calculation. Then the mine blows. One day he goes under. He doesn't come back. That's the obvious tragedy. But here's the real question. What actually rewires Katniss in that moment? It's not just the loss of a parent. It's the instant shift in priorities. Food becomes the only metric that matters. Either she figures out how to keep Prim alive, or they die. Feelings don't put bread on the table in District 12. This is where we talk about her mother, because the Capitol doesn't have to engineer this part. Trauma does it for them. Mrs. Everdeen disappears without leaving the house. She's physically present, emotionally gone. Katniss watches grief turn her mother into a statue in a chair. That part matters, because for a child, the lesson is brutal. Emotions are not just painful, they're incapacitating. If you let them in, you vanish. So what does Katniss do? She makes a trade. No more dependence, no more waiting for adults to fix anything. Hyper-independence is born in that kitchen when she realizes no one is coming. We're going to cover her hunting skills, her poaching, her bartering with Greasy Say in other parts of this video, but emotionally, the same thing is happening. She becomes the sole provider, and that role doesn't leave any room for sitting on the floor and crying about it. You see it in how she talks about her mother later. There's distance, almost report-style language. She notes the breakdown, she notes the recovery, but she never really enters her mother's inner world. Why did she fall apart? What did it feel like? Katniss doesn't ask, and she definitely doesn't want to know, because the answer might be contagious. This early avoidance sets a pattern. When people around her collapse, she pulls back instead of reaching out. When Peter confesses feelings, when Gale pushes for clarity, she reaches for strategy, not introspection. If emotion equals collapse and silence, then trusting any feeling, hers or anyone else's, looks dangerous. So by the time the games arrive, her core flaw is already installed. The arena just gives it sharper edges. In the next section, we're going to watch how that childhood training turns every relationship into a tactical problem, and how long it takes before she realizes survival and healing are not the same game. Survival mode. How trauma rewrites Katniss's operating system. So when that childhood training meets the games, something very specific happens in Katniss's head. Her brain doesn't just go into survival mode, it stays there. This is where we talk about survival logic as an operating system. Katniss evaluates every situation on 3 axes: immediate risk, resource management, tactical advantage. That's it. You can see it the moment she meets Peter on the train. At face value, you're watching a sweet boy throw burnt bread to a starving girl. But in Katniss's internal narration, she's cataloguing debts, leverage, and potential threats. Why did he help me? What does he want? How could this be used against me in the arena? Here's the real question. Where, in that constant cost-benefit analysis, is there room for "I feel safe with him" or "I might care about him"? There isn't. When every interaction is triaged for danger, emotional reflection becomes a luxury item the Seam could never afford. Back in District 12, you see the same code running. Her view of marriage is brutally pragmatic. More mouths to feed, more risk of children being reaped, more grief when the games take them. The idea of romance doesn't carry promise. It carries statistical exposure. That part matters because Collins shows you a world where other teens flirt and gossip, and Katniss is mentally calculating tesserae, hunting routes, and coal mine accidents. She's not cold by nature. She's busy staying alive. Even Prim's reaping, which should be the most purely emotional moment, passes through this filter. There's a split second where Katniss calculates the odds. Prim will die. I have better skills. My body is more expendable because I can hunt and maybe win. Then she moves. To us, it reads as love. In Katniss's own narration, it's framed as the only logical move on the board. In the arena, this operating system is brilliant. Survival logic keeps her alive. She spots traps, rations resources, forms alliances based on terrain and timing. She turns Peter's confession into a strategy, the star-crossed lover's angle into a weapon against the Capitol. We're going to cover how effective that is in the next section. But the hidden cost is already there. She has to treat every feeling as either camouflage or bait. And that works, until it doesn't. In relationships and politics, the same instincts cause major misreads. She underestimates Peter's sincerity because real love doesn't fit her risk model. She misses Gale's slide into extremism because anger and vengeance look on the surface like useful fuel for rebellion. When your metric is, will this help us win? You stop asking, what is this doing to us? That's emotional illiteracy as a side effect. When your brain is always scanning for threats, you never build a vocabulary for your own inner life. There is a lot to uncover here. She doesn't just avoid feelings, she literally doesn't know how to name them. So she defaults to familiar language, strategy, duty, debt. Especially once the Capitol cameras turn on. And that's the final twist. The games don't just exploit this survival mode, they supercharge it. Then, on top of that, they demand she become instantly emotionally fluent for an audience that wants tears, kisses, and speeches on command. How do you perform a heart you've never been allowed to study? In the next part, we'll watch what happens when Panem turns that weakness into its favorite show. Note, the arena is supposed to test your body. The 74th games prove it's really testing your ability to read a heart in public. We open with Peter's interview. Caesar asks if there's a girl back home, and Peter drops the line you probably have memorized. Because she came here with me. At face value, it's a swoony yae moment, the Capitol's dream. Instant romance, instant ratings, instant hope. But here's the real question. What story is Peter actually telling, and why can Katniss only hear half of it? Peter is doing two things at once. On one level, the crush is real. The books make it clear he's been watching her since the first day of school. Bread, dandelions, the whole quiet devotion package. On another level, he's absolutely strategic. He knows the Capitol loves a narrative, and star-crossed lovers is a safer relationship to them than angry rebel from District 12. The problem is, Katniss's brain is wired to prioritize the move over the meaning. Strategy she understands. Feelings? That's where the games get dangerous. So this is where we talk about her internal narration. The second she hears about the confession, she doesn't think, "Oh, he cares about me." She thinks, "He made me look weak." She decides Haymitch put him up to it. She tells herself Peter is playing her, that his kindness is a weapon. Every time he does something tender, warning her about the careers, throwing her the bread in flashback, insisting she sleep while he keeps watch, she files it under manipulation, not affection. There is a lot to uncover here, because admitting it might be real would mean admitting she has something to lose. That part matters because misreading him isn't just a cute misunderstanding. It's a tactical liability. Her reluctance to trust Peter fully delays their alliance. She spends crucial early days alone, half-starved, instead of coordinating with the one person committed to keeping her alive. When she finds him camouflaged and dying, she still frames the cave relationship as performance first, reality second. She kisses him for sponsors, not for herself. And by holding back from emotionally committing to the story the Capitol already believes, she hesitates on bold moves, hesitates on running, on playing up the romance, until Peter is repeatedly at the edge of death and their joint victory is almost impossible. Now compare that to Rue. Katniss trusts Rue fast. Why? Rue reminds her of Prim, and grief is a language Katniss actually speaks. Their alliance is instinctive, gentle, almost wordless. But even there, notice what happens when Rue dies. Katniss doesn't give a speech about her feelings. She arranges flowers, sings, gives the district salute. She turns raw emotion into symbol, into something the cameras can hold, so she doesn't have to say, "I loved her." So here's the question that haunts the rest of the trilogy. If Katniss had been able to recognize and accept her feelings for Peter earlier, not just as strategy, but as truth, how differently would the 74th Games have gone? And if their love story started from honesty instead of confusion, how different would the rebellion's origin myth be? District 12's quiet rules. Why Katniss never learned the language of feelings. So if Katniss's confusion about Peter rewrites the games, we have to ask a bigger question. Where did that confusion even come from? Because you don't end up that emotionally tongue-tied by accident. This is where we talk about District 12's quiet rules. In the career districts, kids are basically raised on stage. Districts 1, 2, and 4 train you to throw a spear and throw a smile. You learn how to cry on cue for sponsors, how to turn fear into a performance the Capitol can sell. At face value, it looks brutal but glamorous. You become a victor, you get glory. Your district gets hope. But here's the real question. What happens in a place where none of that performance training exists? District 12 trains you in the opposite direction. You keep your head down. You don't draw attention. You don't make the peacekeepers remember your face. The games are not a dream. They're a nightmare you avoid by being invisible. So from childhood, Katniss is absorbing a different emotional rulebook. Attention is dangerous, and big feelings bring attention. In the seam, that rule gets even harsher. This is a community where a wrong word can mean a whipping for someone who traded on the black market. Gossip isn't entertainment. It's a weapon. So people learn to communicate in nods, in shared routes to the woods, in silently slipping a squirrel across a table. Open vulnerability is rare, not because no one feels anything, but because naming your fear or your grief doesn't put food on the table. Notice how often Katniss describes understanding people without anyone talking. She and Gale split the woods without a spoken plan. Greasy Say knows when to hand over soup without asking questions. There is a lot to uncover here, because survival communities often rely on unspoken understanding. It's efficient, it's protective, but it also means no one teaches you the language of feelings. They teach you the grammar of endurance. He cares deeply, but when he's hurt, where does it go? Straight into anger at the Capitol, into abstract speeches about justice and revolution. It's easier for him to talk about blowing up a dam than to say, "You choosing Peter in that cave broke me." His emotional life gets outsourced into political rhetoric, and Katniss sees that as normal. And who would correct her? Her father dies. Her mother shuts down so completely that Katniss learns emotions are a liability. Prim is a child. Peers are busy not starving. Even the kind adults, Say, Hazel, express care through actions, not words. A bowl of stew, a mended shirt, a shared coal allowance. That part matters because Katniss grows up fluent in sacrifice, but almost illiterate in naming why she's sacrificing. So when the Capitol drags her into a media ecosystem that runs on emotional performance, District 12's strength becomes a weakness. Silence kept her alive at home. On camera, that same silence turns into misreads, mixed signals, and a girl who can't tell where the script ends and her real feelings begin. And once the rebellion starts needing a Mockingjay instead of a miner's daughter, that District 12 weakness doesn't just cost her clarity, it starts to cost lives. Catching Fire, the love triangle she can't read. So when we move into Catching Fire, that same silence walks straight into a love triangle she can't even read. On paper, you'd think this is where Katniss finally has to pick a boy. But here's the real question. How do you choose a relationship when you don't even have a vocabulary for your own feelings? Gale forces the issue first. His confession and that kiss by the slag heap should be a romantic turning point. Instead, it's a diagnostic tool. He finally says it out loud. He loves her, he's been in this for years, and the cousin act is a lie. Katniss's reaction? Not swooning. Not clear rejection. It's a rush of guilt that she's hurt him, obligation because he fed her family, and panic over what this now requires from her. At face value, it reads as a love scene. Underneath, it's a scene about a girl who cannot answer the basic question, what do I want? This is where we talk about her internal monologue, because there is a lot to uncover here. When Katniss weighs Gale versus Peter, she almost never frames it as desire. She does math. Gale is the boy who kept her sister from starving. Peter is the boy who saved her in the arena and still protects her on the victory tour. With Gale, she thinks in terms of debt and history. With Peter, she thinks in terms of safety and strategy. She keeps asking, what do I owe and what keeps my family alive? She almost never asks, what makes me feel hope? And the rebellion sees that gap immediately. Coin, Plutarch, even Haymitch to a degree. Look at her relationships and see tools. Peter is perfect for the star-crossed narrative. Gale is perfect for the angry district rebel. Katniss can't clearly define either bond, which makes it easy for other people to script them. If she doesn't say, Peter is my partner, he can be turned into a hostage. If she doesn't say, Gale is just my friend, he can be framed as the natural successor in her story. That part matters because symbols are easiest to control when they don't argue with their own script. Peter, meanwhile, is emotionally fluent in a way that almost feels unfair. He knows what he feels, he names it, he repeats it, even when it hurts him. Katniss keeps trying to downgrade it to an act, or rationalize it as a useful promise to the districts, or compartmentalize it as for the cameras. That constant misalignment is why their scenes in Catching Fire feel so tense. You're watching one person speak in feelings and another translate everything back into strategy. And all of this would just be messy romance if Panem weren't built on televised death. The problem is, this confusion doesn't stay theoretical. It walks into the Quarterquell arena with her. It steps onto the cornucopia. It's standing there when the rebels trigger their extraction plan, and the person Katniss can't name as hers is the one the Capitol gets to first. Mockingjay mode, when being a symbol feels safer than being a person. So when Katniss wakes up in District 13, something strange happens. For the first time since the Reaping, no one is actively trying to kill her, and she falls apart. This is where we talk about dissociation. In 13, Katniss isn't just sad or stressed. She's hollowed out. She spends hours in hospital rooms, in bunk corridors, in those concrete cafeterias, feeling nothing, and then suddenly too much. She describes herself as a plate that's being dropped, glued back together but never quite solid. Survival mode has burned out her wiring. So when Coin and Plutarch hand her a role with clear lines, clear costumes, clear targets, it feels, at face value, almost merciful. Just be the Mockingjay. Don't be the girl who lost her home, her father, her district, and now Peter. Here's the real question. Why does being a symbol feel safer to her than being a person? The reason is identity erosion. A person has to know what they want, what they feel, what they're responsible for. A symbol just has to hit their marks and look convincing on camera. Katniss has spent 3 books telling us she doesn't understand her own motives, so the Mockingjay costume becomes a shortcut. If she can't read her heart, she can at least read a script. Except she can't. Not at first. The propo shoots in the woods are a disaster because they require staged emotion. She's supposed to deliver polished outrage on command, and nothing comes out right. Her body knows how to knock an arrow, but her face doesn't know how to sell inspiring rebel speech on take 3. The games taught her to react to real danger, not to pretend. Then they drop her into actual ruins. District 8 burning. The hospital bombed the moment she turns to the camera and says, "Fire is catching." That part matters because it proves she isn't empty. She's just unable to access herself on cue. Real anger, real grief, real defiance crack through the numbness. But even then, she doesn't translate that surge into self-understanding. She doesn't think, "I am this kind of person." She thinks, "Good, they can use that in a propo." She immediately converts feeling into footage, and then Peter comes back, hijacked, terrified of her, accusing her of being dangerous, manipulative, unreal. His mistrust lands harder than any capital whip because it echoes something she already believes, that her own emotions are a trap she can't navigate. She can't articulate her grief for the boy with the bread, or the shape of her love, or even why it hurts to see him flinch away. Their relationship becomes a brutal mirror. He doesn't trust her, and she doesn't trust herself. So is she choosing the Mockingjay role, or is it choosing her? There is a lot to uncover here. Coin's entire system is built on offering Katniss an escape hatch. Don't think about what you want after the war. Just film another propo. Don't process your trauma. Channel it into strategy. The promise is simple. If she keeps performing, she won't have to ask who she is when the games finally end. And that's the question the story keeps dodging, right up until it can't anymore. The Gale question, silence, guilt, and the choice she never makes out loud. So when we say the story keeps dodging that question, this is where we talk about Gale. Because if Coin is the system-level version of don't think, just perform, Gale is the personal version. He's the person who knows Katniss before the cameras, before the Mockingjay, before the promise of rebellion. At face value, he's just the hunting partner, the boy in the woods. But here's the real question. How do you go from shared snares to shared war crimes without ever having a real conversation about what you are to each other? Track his arc. In District 12, Gale and Katniss are co-providers locked in a survival relationship that's all about game counts and tesserae math. He clearly feels more. He hints at running away. He bristles at Peter. He kisses her in the woods. His emotional trajectory is rising. Hers? It's flatlined into practicality. Every time his feelings surface, she retreats into logistics. How will our families eat? What about the peacekeepers? What's the plan? We're going to cover those missed conversations because that part matters. When Gale says they could leave, she doesn't ask, leave as what? Friends? Something else? She pivots to the reason it's impossible. When he kisses her after she returns from the first games, she doesn't say, I don't know what I want. She says essentially, I can't think about that. I have to be a victor now. It's not cruelty, it's emotional illiteracy weaponized by trauma. Then the war escalates. Gale shifts from angry hunter to would-be revolutionary. He's in the mines during the whipping. He becomes a co-conspirator with Beatty. He's brainstorming traps that mirror the arena. His moral center starts drifting toward pure efficiency. Whatever hurts the capital most. Katniss feels the distance. She flinches at the double explosion snare. She's unnerved by his casual talk of acceptable losses. But does she say, this scares me? Where are your lines? No, they default to tactics. Another plan, another mission, and that's how you get to Prim's death. The bombing strategy that may or may not be Gale's design sits right at the intersection of their shared avoidance. She never asked him to explain what revenge would cost. He never asked her what kind of rebellion she could live with. When the parachutes fall, it isn't just the capital's cruelty detonating. It's every unsaid boundary. Afterward, the fracture is almost eerily quiet. No screaming match, no courtroom scene. Just Gale telling her he doesn't expect forgiveness and leaving for another district. Katniss never fully interrogates him, never demands, did you know? Their relationship dissolves into an unspoken verdict neither of them actually reads out loud. Here's the pattern interrupt. It's tempting to blame one of them, Gale for the ruthlessness, Katniss for the silence. But what if the real reason this ends in a non-ending is that both were raised in a world where you learn to hunt, to calculate, to survive the games, and never to name what you feel before it blows up the people you love? The Peter problem, when someone loves you better than you understand yourself. So if Gale and Katniss are two people who never learn to name what they feel, what happens when you drop in someone who does that almost too well? This is where we talk about Peter. On the surface, he's the baker's son, the soft one from the same poor district. But at face value, his real power isn't strength or strategy. It's emotional fluency. Peter reflects on his inner world, he names it, and then he says it out loud in front of the entire Capitol. I've had a crush on you since I was 5. Who does that in the games? Someone who understands that telling the truth can be a weapon. Katniss hears the same moment and immediately runs it through a different system. Not, what do I feel, but what's the angle? What's the risk? Feelings are suspicious data points to her. You don't explore them, you minimize them so they can't compromise survival. That part matters because it means they're not just two personalities. They're running two incompatible operating systems. Across all 3 books, Peter keeps offering emotional clarity, confessions on the train, reassurances before the arena, honest fears about losing himself. He keeps trying to define the relationship in real words, and Katniss keeps meeting that with half-truths, strategic kisses, or silence. Not because she's cruel, because she is genuinely emotionally under-resourced. When your whole childhood trained you to hunt, to calculate, to outthink the games, introspection feels almost dangerous. The beach scene in Catching Fire is the cleanest example. Peter lays it all out. He knows he's supposed to die. He's already given the locket. He's planning for her future without him. It's doomed love and sacrifice, spoken plainly. Here's the real question. What does Katniss actually give back in that moment? She kisses him. She begs him to stay alive. She promises she needs him. There is real affection there, real panic. But under the surface, she's still running numbers. Who has the better chance? How to use the star-crossed lover's narrative? How to keep him as an anchor for the district? Then hijacked Peter shows up and flips the board. Suddenly, his greatest strength, his clear perception of her, is twisted into its opposite. He names her as a monster, a mutt, the reason everyone dies. And Katniss realizes something terrifying. She has almost no emotional evidence to argue back with. Who is she to him, really, beyond actions and half-choked instincts? She's never fully defined it for herself, so she can't disprove the Capitol's rewrite. So, why does she end up choosing Peter after the war, when the cameras are gone and the games are technically over? We're going to cover the slow, painful way she starts decoding her own feelings, why that burned bread memory, those nights with the nightmares, and that final real or not real become the only map out of her own emotional blackout. And the unsettling part, once you see what finally forces her to learn that language, it completely changes how you read that quiet, domestic ending. Why doesn't she just talk? The meta question everyone asks. So here's the annoying thing about Katniss. You can map every trap in the arena, every weak point in the Capitol, but you cannot get this girl to say out loud what she feels. You watch her with Peter in the cave, with Gale in the woods, with Coin in those strategy meetings, and your brain is screaming. Just tell them. Just answer the question. Just talk. At face value, it looks simple. Is she stubborn? Emotionally immature? Is this just YA love triangle drama turned up to 11? This is where we talk about the meta frustration. Because readers don't only judge her choices, they start to judge the writing. Why doesn't she ever give a straight emotional answer? Why does every conversation detour back into hunting, food, logistics, the games, anything but the relationship right in front of her? Here's the real question. What if that silence isn't a mistake, but the whole design? There is a lot to uncover here. Psychologically, Katniss is a classic complex trauma survivor. She loses her father in an explosion, Her mother disappears into grief. The district is starving. So 12-year-old Katniss does what a lot of kids in that situation do. She becomes hyper-functional. She is brilliant at reading terrain, tracking game, bargaining in the hob. She's a victor long before the arena. But the cost is that all her energy goes outward into survival. None of it goes inward into naming feelings. That part matters because complex trauma doesn't just make you sad, it warps your emotional language. You can know the exact weight of a squirrel from 10 paces and still have no vocabulary for "I'm scared you'll leave me." So when Peter confesses on live TV, Katniss runs it through the only system she trusts. Strategy. It must be a move. When Gale kisses her, she doesn't think, "I'm conflicted." She thinks, "This complicates the rebellion." She's not being coy. She's genuinely underdeveloped in that area. And Suzanne Collins writes the narration to prove it. The voice is blunt, practical, constantly counting food, weapons, exits. Notice how often Katniss reports what people do instead of what they feel. She'll tell you Peter's hands are shaking, Gale's jaw is tight, Prim's eyes are wide. She rarely risks a guess at why. Collins trusts you to feel the gap between what Katniss reports and what's actually happening. The tension is in that negative space. So when you want to shake her and yell, "Just choose Peter or Gale," you're bumping into the point. The emotional illiteracy is the flaw. It delays alliances in the games, it scrambles rebel strategy, it nearly destroys her promise to protect Prim. It's also exactly why she's compelling. She's not a wish fulfillment fantasy. She's a trauma survivor trying to run a revolution with a heart she can't read. And the real twist, the moment she finally starts talking, is also the moment the story stops letting her hide behind survival logic, hope, fear, and the cost of not knowing yourself. Because once she starts talking, we hit Snow's favorite equation head on. Hope. It is the only thing stronger than fear. He's talking about crowds and districts and the games as a spectacle. But here's the real question. What happens when that same equation is running inside Katniss herself? Fear of her own feelings on one side, this tiny, stubborn hope for love and safety on the other. At face value, Snow is describing propaganda. Give the districts just enough hope, a victor, a parade, a promise of food, so they don't snap. But inside Katniss, the system looks eerily similar. She's terrified that if she admits she wants more than survival, she'll lose everything. So she rations hope. One loaf of bread from Peter. One night of peace with Prim. One imagined future that she never quite says out loud. There is a lot to uncover here, because both the Capitol and the rebels see that gap and move in. This is where we talk about weaponized misunderstanding. Snow doesn't need Katniss to know what she feels about Peter. He needs her not to know so he can sell a star-crossed lover narrative to the districts and a dangerous seductress story to the Capitol. Coin does the same thing with the Mockingjay. She doesn't ask what Katniss wants. She tells her what she should want for the districts, for justice, for revenge. Notice the pattern? Every time Katniss hesitates, every time she can't name her own desire, someone else supplies a script. Lover. Victor. When she agrees to be the Mockingjay for Prim, it sounds noble. But that part matters because it shows how easy it is to steer her. If you frame it as protecting someone else, she'll walk straight into the role. Why is that so effective? Because emotional illiteracy is a control mechanism. If you can't say, "I want X," it's almost impossible to say, No, I don't want why. Katniss can argue with bad tactics. She struggles to argue with bad destinies. So when Plutarch, Coin, even Haymitch tell her what her life should be for, she measures their plans against duty, not against desire. That's a rigged game. And yet, the text keeps slipping us evidence of what she actually hopes for. The quiet mornings with Prim in Victor's village, where the games feel far away for half a second. The cave with Peter, where the performance blurs and she almost lets herself enjoy being cared for. The children at the end, where she admits she never wanted them, but also that they are proof the fear has loosened its grip. So what's the real victory? It isn't just killing Snow or even Coin. It's that painfully slow shift where Katniss allows herself to want a life that isn't built entirely on fear and obligation. The war ends when the arenas stop. Her story only ends when she risks hoping for something that has nothing to do with the capital at all. But how do you rebuild a self that's been a symbol for years? Book Katniss versus movie Katniss, what we lose without her thoughts. To answer that, we have to talk about something the movies can never fully give you: access to Katniss's brain. On the page, you are trapped inside her head. Every blunt, survival mode thought, every "I don't understand why he's doing this" runs through you in real time. In the films, you're mostly watching her from the outside. Same girl, same games, same districts. But here's the real question. What gets lost when you swap internal monologue for close-up reaction shots? At face value, the movies look faithful. The cave scene is there, the rooftop before the first games is there, the beach in Catching Fire is there. You see Katniss staring at Peter with tears in her eyes, and you think, okay, she gets it. She's in love. She's just in denial about the danger. The camera invites you to read depth into her silence. But Book Katniss is not silently swooning. She's doing emotional calculus. In the first arena, Peter throws her the bread of his entire life, and later she's still asking if his kindness is a strategy. In the cave, the narration literally has her rating kisses in terms of how convincing they'll be for sponsors. She thinks, in plain text, that she doesn't know what she feels and that this entire relationship might just be one more weapon. The film turns that into lingering eye contact and soft lighting. There is a lot to uncover here because that shift quietly upgrades her emotional competence. Same thing on the train after the games. In the book, she's spiraling. Did I lead him on? Does he hate me? What do I owe him now that we're both victors? She explicitly shuts down, defaulting to, I'll just survive this too. In the movie, we mostly get a quiet, hurt Peter and a conflicted Katniss staring out the window. You can project any mature emotional vocabulary you want onto that face. The text tells you she doesn't have that vocabulary. This is where we talk about Jennifer Lawrence. Her performance is fantastic, but it's almost too good for Katniss's own self-awareness. She plays flashes of tenderness, grief, and affection that Katniss would never consciously name in that moment. The audience feels the emotion clearly, even when the character on the page is burying it under hunting metaphors and food inventories. That part matters because it blurs the line between what Katniss actually understands and what we as viewers wish she understood. And you can see the fallout in fandom discourse. Movie-only fans often treat her as a straightforward hero in a tragic romance. Brave girl, cruel games, doomed boy. The capital is evil. Snow is the villain. The relationship with Peter is a slow burn promise she's secretly aware of the whole time. But the books keep insisting on her emotional illiteracy. She is not playing 4D chess with her heart. She's avoiding looking at the board. Pattern interrupt for your next rewatch. Take the cave, the beach, even the real or not real scenes, and mentally overlay the book narration. Imagine every intense close-up is accompanied by her thinking, "I don't know what I feel, but I have to keep him alive." Or, "This is for the cameras." Feel that dissonance between what she does and what she thinks. Because the next step is asking why Collins wanted you inside that confusion in the first place. What if Katniss had the words? A speculative Panem rewrite. So let's flip the lens for a second. You've been sitting inside Katniss's confusion. Now imagine a version of Panem where that confusion isn't the default setting. What happens if the girl on fire actually has the words? Not therapy couches in District 12, sure, but a mother who never disappears emotionally after the mine explosion. A community healer who doesn't just set bones, but names grief. Even a culture where it's normal to say, "I'm scared," without it sounding like weakness. At face value, that sounds small. Here's the real question. In a world built on silence, how much power does it give Katniss just to have language for what she feels? Start in the first games. Peter drops that rooftop confession on national television. Canon Katniss immediately files it under strategy, because that's the only category she trusts. In our rewrite, she still doubts him, but she can hold two truths at once. This helps the show, and he might actually care about me. That part matters because it changes the timing. Maybe she seeks him out in training, not just to assess a threat, but to ask, "Why did you say that?" Imagine an earlier, honest alliance built on mutual survival and named affection, not just Haymitch's notes and sponsor theatre. If the Capitol sees a real relationship instead of a confused performance, sponsor dynamics shift. Snow isn't just exploiting a romance. He's watching a District 12 girl refuse to let the games turn her into a prop. There is a lot to uncover here. Does that make her more dangerous earlier, or does a Katniss who can articulate boundaries actually play the long game better? Then we hit the Gale-Peter triangle. This is where we talk about emotional literacy as a weapon. In canon, Katniss lets implication do most of the work, and Gale fills the silence with resentment. In the speculative version, she tells him before the 75th games, "I love you as my family, but I can't promise you the future you want." Brutal. She also names Peter out loud. "He makes me feel safe in a way I don't understand." Does that stop Gale's anger entirely? Probably not. But it removes the illusion that she betrayed a promise she never actually made. Fast forward to Mockingjay. A Katniss who understands trauma doesn't magically stop dissociating, but she recognizes it. She can tell Coin, "I'll be your Mockingjay, but I need veto power over the missions you attach my image to." She can ask Plutarch the question she never quite gets to in canon. What happens to me when your war is over? Suddenly, the symbol is negotiating terms instead of being passed around a war room. So here's the real question to end on. If Katniss had those words, would she still become the Mockingjay we know? Or would Panem have needed a completely different kind of fire to burn the Capitol down? Does she ever heal? Katniss after the war. So if Katniss had the words during the war, could she have rewritten her role? The story answers that by doing something harsher. It takes the war away and asks, what happens when there's nothing left to fight but yourself? Post-war Katniss in Victor's village is almost a ghost. She goes back to the same houses the Capitol built as a promise of safety. and they're still standing when everything else in District 12 is ash. At face value, that looks like a reward. In practice, it's a mausoleum. She spends days in bed, she dissociates by sitting in the woods, she contemplates suicide. Notice what she doesn't do. She doesn't narrate big feelings. No, I am devastated. No eloquent breakdown. Her emotional language stays flat, clinical, survival mode. And yet, there is a lot to uncover here. Slowly, she starts to hunt again, not as the fierce provider, but as someone relearning how to move through a world that isn't actively trying to kill her. She rebuilds routine, hunting, trading, planting Prim's herbs. This is where we talk about adaptation. She's not suddenly emotionally fluent. She's building a schedule that lets her feel in tiny, controlled doses without drowning. Then Peter comes back for real. Not hijacked Peter, not capital asset, but a boy planting primroses under her window. Their relationship in the epilogue is fascinating because she still frames it in terms of safety. She describes how he wraps his arms around me during the nightly games in her head, how they play real or not real to sort memory from trauma. That part matters because she's finally sitting with the feelings instead of cutting them off at the root. She names fear, she admits dependence. For Katniss, that's radical. Here's the real question. Do the children mean she's healed or just that time passed? Remember, she spends years refusing the idea of kids, terrified of feeding anyone else into the games. When she finally has them, she doesn't deliver a triumphant speech about hope. She talks about how it took years for Peter to wear her down, how she still wakes up panicked, how she watches the meadow and thinks about mass graves. Hope is present, but it's quiet, negotiated, conditional. Her daughter plays in a world where there are no Hunger Games, and Katniss's fear doesn't vanish. It just stops driving the car. That's the shift. She holds Peter's hand during nightmares. She counts their children's breaths. She lets herself want their safety and, by extension, a future. It's not eloquence. It's exposure therapy. So why does this matter for her weakness? Because the flaw never turns into a strength. It turns into a scar. Other people can't weaponize it anymore. Snow is gone. Coin is gone. But inside, she's still the girl who doesn't have the words. Only now she's arranged her life so she doesn't need a speech to keep going. And that raises one last, uncomfortable question we're going to cover next. If the games are over, why does Katniss still live as if they might come back at any moment? The hidden weakness, zoomed up, Katniss versus her own heart. So if Katniss keeps living as if the games might restart tomorrow, what does that actually tell you? It's the final proof that the arena never just lived in the capital. It moved into her head. Because here's the real question. What is Katniss Everdeen's actual weakness? It's not fear. It's not hesitation under fire. At face value, she's one of the bravest people in Panem. The flaw that almost breaks her isn't a lack of courage. It's a lack of language and trust for her own emotions, built from childhood trauma and cemented by a district that treats feelings as a luxury you can't afford. Back then, when her father died and her mother shut down, Katniss learned one brutal rule. If you stop to feel, your family starves. So she becomes hyper-independent, the bow as her first vocabulary. Food on the table means love. Silence means survival. That part matters because it sets the template. She doesn't just avoid talking about feelings. She genuinely doesn't have the tools. So when the first games hit and Peter throws her the bread again, This time in the arena, she has no category for it except strategy. He says he's had a crush on her forever. She files it under angle for the cameras. Her heart is giving her one reading, her survival brain another, and she always trusts the part trained by District 12. The result? A delayed alliance, constant second-guessing, and a relationship that starts on a foundation of mutual misinterpretation. Catching Fire just scales that confusion up. Now the love triangle isn't just Gale versus Peter, it's symbol versus self. What does she actually want, and what does the rebellion need her to want? She can't answer, so Snow, Coin, and Haymitch answer for her. We're going to cover how often other people define her true feelings, but the core pattern is simple. When you can't name your own desires, someone else will. By Mockingjay, she retreats almost entirely into symbolism. The Mockingjay costume, the propo, the carefully staged visits to the districts. These become safer than real conversations. You can see why. A symbol doesn't have to explain why it chose one boy or why it can't forgive another. It just has to burn on screen. There is a lot to uncover here, because that emotional illiteracy doesn't just hurt Katniss. It shapes the entire rebellion. Plot-wise, this weakness ripples everywhere. Miscommunications slow down trust with Peter, fracture her relationship with Gale without real closure, and keep her distant from her mother even after the war. The rebellion uses her brilliantly as the Mockingjay, but never truly understands her, and she doesn't fully understand herself well enough to resist being used. And thematically, in a story obsessed with performance, propaganda, and control, this is where we talk about the most ironic twist. The girl least able to articulate her inner life becomes the perfect blank surface for everyone else's narrative. Her inability to name her own feelings is both her personal tragedy and the reason she's so easy to turn into a symbol. Which brings us back to the opening image. The bow in her hands, the Mockingjay pin on her chest, all the visible armor the capital and the districts can see. Underneath, there's an invisible crack, the unspoken grief, the unnamed love, the unanswered questions, that never gets a full speech in the text, but quietly bends every choice she makes. So, if the games are over, but she still sleeps with that bow nearby, what does that say about the promise of peace in Panem? In the final section, we're going to cover what Katniss's hidden weakness means for everyone who grows up in the world she remade, and whether her children ever get the words she didn't. Your turn in the arena. Where does Katniss's weakness hurt most? So now that we've walked through all of that, here's the real question. Where do you think Katniss's hidden weakness actually hurts the most? Is it the arena, where she keeps reading Peter's feelings as strategy long after it stops making sense and almost loses a real ally because survival logic feels safer than trust? Is it with Gale, where she can't name what she wants and leaves a vacuum the war is more than happy to fill? Or is it with Prim, where her entire identity as protector becomes so rigid that the moment she can't protect, her whole sense of self collapses? This is where we talk about you stepping into the arena a little. If you had to pick one scene, one chapter, one quiet moment where her emotional blind spot does the most damage, what would it be? The cave in the first games? The kiss with Gale in District 2? The hanging tree broadcasts? That final walk towards Snow's mansion when she still can't quite look Peter in the eye and say what he actually means to her? And here's the follow-up question that really matters. Who, if anyone, are you blaming? Do you see this as Katniss's fault, a flaw she should have fixed earlier, before people got hurt? Or does it feel more like a brutally realistic trauma response from a girl whose father died, whose mother shut down, and whose entire district's survival depended on her not having time to sit around naming feelings? Or do you put most of the weight on Panem itself? On a world where the games teach you that every relationship is a potential weapon, every promise is a trap, and every confession can be replayed on a capital screen forever. At face value, it's easy to say she should have just told Peter the truth. But that part matters because in a system built on surveillance and punishment, emotional honesty isn't just vulnerable, it's dangerous. There is a lot to uncover here when we start asking where responsibility actually lives. Is her hyper-independence a personal weakness or a systemic failure engineered by Snow's entire structure of control? When she chooses distance, is that a moral mistake or the only strategy that ever kept her family alive? And if you're interested in pulling on that thread, we're going to cover the hidden weaknesses of the people orbiting her too. Peter's self-sacrificing identity and why he keeps offering himself up as the one who burns. Gale's moral absolutism, the reason he can justify the bomb that changes everything. Snow's obsession with control, and how his need to manage every narrative ironically creates the Mockingjay he fears. If treating the Hunger Games as a psychological and political case file is your thing, you might want to stick around and join this little victor's village of overthinkers we're building here. We're going to keep asking why these characters break the way they do and what that says about our own world. Because in Panem, and in stories built on worlds like this, the deadliest weaknesses are almost never the ones anyone talks about out loud.